Hello everyone, and welcome to AustCham Thailand's Business Connections community, our online TV program where we bring you updates from our membership base today from all around the globe. Episode 4 features guests from Singapore, London and Melbourne. Stay with us. And welcome back. For our business section this episode, we welcome Khoon Goh, Head of Asia Research at ANZ Singapore. He's going to be presenting for us or providing an update on the 2021 economic outlook. I know we all have some concerns that it might be bleak. Khoon's either going to give us some good news or, I guess, reaffirm our concerns. Khoon, how are you?
Hi, Brandon. Thanks for having me on your program.
Pleasure. How are things in Singapore? I've seen that also in lockdown or partial lockdown down there.
Yes, unfortunately, we've seen a resurgence of community cases here in Singapore, and we just went into what is called a phase 2 heightened alert situation yesterday, which is pretty much a partial lockdown.
Okay, so quite similar to Thailand. We're on the same page and hoping to get out of it soon. So, Khoon, we last met you also virtually in August last year, providing an economic outlook for how you thought the end of 2020 and 2021 was going to look. So we're going to reflect a lot back on that and how you see the rest of this year going. Starting with, in your presentation, you compared the Asian economic crisis with then the global financial crisis and then COVID 2020 back in August. How are we comparing now?
Well, the economic contraction that Thailand went through in 2020 was definitely a lot severe than what the economy went through during the global financial crisis. It wasn't as bad as what Thailand fared during the Asian financial crisis in 1998. Thai GDP contracted by 7.6%, whereas in 2020, the Thai economy contracted by 6.1%. It's still a very, very sharp contraction, but at least nowhere near as bad as what was experienced more than 30 years ago.
Right. I remember in your presentation last time, you did mention that it was a health crisis, not a financial crisis. Is that still the case today?
Yes, thankfully, it's a health crisis that morphed into an economic crisis. And so far, not only in Thailand, but globally, we have managed to stave off a financial crisis. And that's because of the unprecedented support that policymakers in Thailand and all around the world provided to help support the economy during periods of lockdown and in terms of trying to deal with the economic damage that the pandemic brought.
Excellent. Now, you also mentioned we were at risk of a solvency crisis at that time. Has that become a reality?
Now, thankfully, we have managed to avoid that situation for now. And once again, it's thanks to the active steps that governments took. Now, in Thailand, the Bank of Thailand introduced debt moratoriums. And I know some of that have expired, but some of them have been extended to affected sectors. That has been very, very important in ensuring that a solvency crisis was avoided, giving time for businesses to recover and avoid bankruptcy. And this has been something that has been instrumental in ensuring that economic activity did not contract even more severely than it did last year.
Good, and I know a lot of our members watching now are hanging on by the skin of their teeth in terms of going down the rehabilitation or bankruptcy road, but they're certainly keen to hang in there, which is very good for us. You mentioned the affected industries. We know that tourism is, of course, the most affected here in Thailand. What impact has the continued delay of return of international tourism had?
Now, the Thai economy is very reliant on international tourism, as you know. Roughly about 15% of GDP is tied to spending by international tourists. And the sad reality is that, particularly given the current wave that we are experiencing, the return or normalization of international tourism is still some way off. Now, we were hoping that it could occur sometime this year, but increasingly it's looking like perhaps it's going to be a 2022 affair. So in the interim, unfortunately, the tourism sector will have to continue to face the prospect of very, very few international tourists. And that is a key reason why the Thai economy will remain sluggish in terms of its economic recovery throughout this year.
And, looking further at different sectors, who has done well out of this? A three-part question. Who has done well? Who has suffered most, apart from tourism, of course? And who do you predict to bounce back quickest?
Well, the beneficiaries of the pandemic has been the technology companies, those that were able to adapt and see demand increase. And for example, if not for the pandemic, we probably wouldn't be doing this program through Zoom. So there has been a quick acceleration in terms of take-up of new technology. So those sectors have definitely been clear beneficiaries. Export-orientated sectors have definitely fared very well. We've seen very strong external demand, and exporters have really seen their products and demand pick up, which is why today's Q1 Thailand GDP numbers that came out surprised to the upside, mainly thanks to much stronger performance from exports. Now, in terms of the other sectors that are not doing so well, tourism, obviously, as we mentioned already, and largely, local hospitality or those industries that are very human intensive, that require touch points because of restrictions and whatnot. Those sectors have really seen activity drop off, and those are the ones that will take some time to really recover.
Mm-hmm. We saw consumer spending in Thailand seem to grow in the latter part of 2020. How is it doing so far in 2021, and what can we expect for the remainder of the year?
Now, unfortunately, it's a little bit of a stop-start affair. Now, when restrictions eased off, when case numbers came down, that resulted in a pickup in consumer spending. But as Thailand went through a second and now currently a third wave, due to the restrictions that have come back in, we've seen once again spending activity drop off, and consumer confidence levels have also fallen in Thailand. And the high-frequency mobility indicators that we track have started to show a decline in activity again recently. So it looks as if, how domestic demand, how consumer spending is going to fare for the rest of this year is largely going to be tied to how the current wave will progress, which in turn will be tied to how governments in Thailand will continue to ease or impose further restrictions. That's just pretty much going to be the key for how domestic demand will evolve this year.
Good. I'd have to say that the hottest topic on my desk at the moment is the vaccination rollout, what's happening there in Thailand with the government's plans. Some countries are obviously doing better than others, and credit to Singapore in the way they've been rolling out their vaccinations, of course. When do we expect to see the economic benefits from the vaccination rollout?
In the case of Thailand, the vaccination rate has been quite low so far at around 2% of the population. But we expect the vaccination rate to really start to ramp up from about June onwards. And in terms of when we can see the benefits of it, typically we think the economy will really benefit from it when it starts to get near towards achieving herd immunity, which is roughly around 70 to 75% of the population being vaccinated. In the case of Thailand, that probably won't occur until sometime in 2022. It depends on, of course, the speed of the vaccination on the supply side, and also how confident the population is in receiving the vaccine. Once we get closer to herd immunity and if it starts to work and see case numbers come down, that will really give us greater confidence that the benefits and the bringing down of restrictions will start to spur a strong rebound in domestic demand.
Thank you. And do you mind if I ask, in terms of Singapore, you mentioned that there is some hesitation in people wanting to receive the vaccination. What about in Singapore? Have people been rushing out to get the vaccination, or is there some apprehension around it?
Thankfully, in the case of Singapore, hesitancy hasn't been very high. So Singapore has the highest rate of vaccination so far at close to 55%, and that's expected to continue to increase. And all going well, Singapore should achieve herd immunity sometime in the third quarter.
That's good news. So final thoughts, best and worst case scenarios for 2021 and beyond.
Look, in terms of the worst case scenario, we are seeing part of it right now with the rising cases and more alarmingly, the mutation and the new strains that we are seeing, which is a lot more infectious and is actually having more of an impact on the younger population, which is something we didn't see with the earlier strain last year. So the concern and the worst case scenario is that further mutations might actually see the vaccine not being as effective as what we were initially hoping for, in which case we're just going to see a continuation of this sort of drag, stop-start economic activity. So I think that's the worst case scenario. Best case, once again, if further development, and now there's hopes that the vaccine could come in the form of a pill rather than having to be injected. That could be a major game changer, because that means that it's going to be a lot more easier to distribute a pill form type vaccine. And if progress can be made and it's going to be effective against future strains or mutations, then we're going to get a lot closer towards normality, or whatever normality that the new normal will bring. And that will see, hopefully in the case of Thailand, an opening of borders again, international travel, and we all get to see our friends and families in faraway lands once again.
Absolutely, and I know the government, the people of Thailand are all hoping to push to open the international borders as soon as possible for economic reasons, and of course also for being able to see friends and family, and hopefully we'll get to see you come up at some stage, Khoon, as well.
I definitely look forward to that day.
Great. So I'd like to thank you for joining us. Pleasure to see you again. And as I mentioned, hope to meet you in person very soon.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you. So that's Khoon Goh, Head of Asia Research at ANZ Singapore. Coming up next is our connection section, and we're looking at education. Stay with us. And welcome back. In our Connections section today, we welcome Stephen Healy, Managing Director and Founder of Nurture Higher Education Group. Steve, how are you?
Good, Brendan. Great to connect into you today.
Excellent. And coming to us live all the way from London, UK.
Yes, indeed. So hopefully something different for your viewers today, but showing really the global reach of the Chamber and the connections you bring.
Excellent. So you're in London at the moment, but your connection to the Chamber is, of course, working with the University of Newcastle, Australia, and the University of the Thai Chamber of Commerce in setting up the very unique Australian education program there. Can you tell our audience a little bit about how that was created?
Yeah, sure, Brendan. Look, I mean, thank you for the opportunity today. And, we'll talk more about how awesome the support from AustCham directors and members has been for the program. But really where we got to is we set up the program 2 years ago. Thailand actually was the first launch point for our partnership with the University of Newcastle. Since the Thailand program started 18 months ago, we're now operating in Indonesia, and also this week putting the final touches to an announcement in Vietnam. So it's very much about, the origins in Thailand of what we've created that's really begun to spread. And very much what we're trying to do with the whole project with the University of Newcastle is really drive at its core mission around equity and excellence, and creating an innovative program that can allow a whole new generation of talented students obtain an Australian education experience and degree and all the connections that brings, without the students necessarily having to go to Australia, either because of their personal circumstances or finances.
So yes, it is the very first of its kind where students can obtain an Australian degree here in Bangkok, Thailand, and of course Jakarta and Vietnam very soon. It's as an Australian living here in Thailand, I can tell you that we're very proud that this has happened. And I believe it's not only for Thai students, it's open really regional and indeed global, the student base. Can you tell us where the students come from?
Students are coming from right across the region, but also further afield. I don't think, Brendan, we can take sole IP and credit and innovation on creating what people would call a dual degree or a dual program. But many of the other programs involving a local uni and an Australian uni often entail some kind of travel to Australia as the lowest common denominator. What we've wanted to do is remove any barrier to excellence, so that, it's not about finance, it's not about your mobility, it's about your academic ability. And that's the real thing we've been able to create with the program. And with that, we've got students from Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, from the surrounding sub-region to Thailand, but also we have students on the program who are not short-term exchange students, but doing the whole degree, from Canada, Sweden, South Africa. And actually, coming this August, despite the pandemic, we have welcome our first German student enrolling on the program. So the programs we're running is a Bachelor of Business from the University of Newcastle. We call it a 2-degree program. So the students actually get 2 transcripts, 2 awards, one from the University of Thai Chamber of Commerce, but also one from the University of Newcastle. So it's not a joint degree with one certificate, or it's not a degree that involves the Australian certificate being issued upon going to Australia. So that's some of the nuance and the uniqueness of what we've been able to bring to the piece. But we're certainly beginning, as I say, despite the pandemic, to attract students from much wider afield. And there's a unique aspect today to our conversation here, Brendan. Just as literally as we spoke, I think 3 hours ago, a rather famous, and we can't plug them, of course, because they may not be one of your partners, but a famous courier service delivered the first degree certificates in their full form to the first graduates this morning. So we were actually very delighted, even though there's not been the official graduation, but a student from Canada, Cambodia, Thailand, of course, and Myanmar have received their graduate degree certificates from the program today in Bangkok. That's awesome.
Great. I actually had a bit of intel into that. I was speaking with one of those students this morning who just popped into the office. I was in the office today as well. So fantastic news and glad to hear it.
Now, I think the technical term for it, Brendan, is they're stoked about it. But, I think having it all come in with the pack and the folders, and I've got the photos I got this morning, but just in terms of the sense of scope, you say, where do the students come from? It doesn't matter where you come from. There's that magic moment of all the academic hard work coming, and you've got a graduate certificate coming from the university, which is awesome. As I say, these are not normal times for us. In normal times, we'd all be getting together now, probably in some ballroom or maybe at the ambassador's residence, celebrating their success. So whatever we can do to shout out their achievements, we're going to take all those advantages wherever they come from.
Absolutely. And another thing that we're pleased for is the building of the talent pool here, knowing that we have more Australian alumni coming into the workforce. So my next question would be, and it relates around the workforce as a starting point, what benefits are we seeing or going to see soon for AustCham members from this program?
No, it's a great question. And it's a question on the lips of the students as well as to why they would undertake these programs as opposed to other programs, whether they can travel abroad in more normal times or choosing another local uni. And a lot of it, I think we tried to come at the whole program from 2 angles in terms of the benefits for members. One is we wanted to focus on the core mission of equity and excellence. So we wanted to create affordable programs that allowed people to begin the journey for a world-class Australian education, but also we didn't want in any way to drop those standards. And I think some of the early feedback, and as I said, we only began the program 2 years ago, so it's not been the easiest 18 months, the last 18 months. But I think members have begun to see that talent pool gradually emerge. As you say, it's a 4-year Bachelor of Business program, so more students will begin to come through. Some members will say, how did we graduate students so quickly? Well, we took them on transfer of credit, just in case there's a technical question around that. But I think what we can see is really, and I think the feedback I've had certainly from the AustCham president, Ben Creed, who's met many of the students and ran a recent mentoring masterclass for them, is actually the level of standard, not just in the best students, but across the board, and very much about raising from the lowest common denominator to say, all of the students coming out of the program are 8, 9, 10 out of 10 students, as opposed to some of the experiences members may have had from local graduates where there could be huge variations, particularly in the English language level. And that's where some of the challenges with members employing local graduates from international English medium programs have had in the past. And I think what we can deliver to members coming out is a graduate that's not only met all of the academic requirements for a good Australian education, but also has the roundedness and the worldliness to go in and interact and engage, not just internally within a company, but also externally. I think also a big part of the program, it's a Bachelor of Business, specializing in innovation and entrepreneurship. So many of the students we have undertaking the program are already running their own small, medium enterprise businesses. So it's not just about those who step in and the employment opportunities with members, but it's also about the wider networking. And as you asked me earlier about where did the students come from, you're now getting students who have spent 4 years potentially or more in Thailand, who may be going back to Cambodia, China, Sweden, Europe, South Africa, and all of those connections, which I think very much is at the heart of what AustCham does. I think it's great building that pipeline of students as they're going through their educational journey and building those connections and mentoring relationships. So it's not just a relationship with members that is crudely about employment, but it's very much around the whole ethos of building connections and that whole community. And as we've seen, when the world gets turned upside down, as it has done in the last 12 months, it's the community that drives business resilience rather than just the core businesses themselves.
You did mention that, so I believe it's Australia in the DNA, obviously based here in Thailand, but what you and the University of Newcastle and University of Thai Chamber of Commerce see it as is really a platform for that global launch for connections, business opportunities.
Absolutely. And as members, I'm sure you'll have members who are solely focused on Thailand and the Thai market, but they'll also be looking broader across the ASEAN region. And we're hoping in time, as the students go through the program in Indonesia and Vietnam, that members may build a connection through them there. Certainly as students go through what is a 4-year, 8-semester program, as students move through into semester 5, halfway through the program, we go through this rites of passage where the students get business cards, and that's when we let them loose on networking events at AustCham. So members will begin to see some of the students, but obviously not as they immediately begin the program as freshmen at 18 or 19, but after they've actually been through the program, have gone through elements of building. And certainly I think, Brendan, thank you to yourself, getting heavily involved with the students. I think we were planning this month until this lockdown to do a whole session around networking for the new set of students who will move into semester 5. But I think that whole mentoring connection piece is really how we build that sense of belonging and sense of connection with Australia. And what we've always said is a student doesn't necessarily have to go and study in Australia to build that sense of connection and belonging. And if we're able to build that connection while the student is there in Bangkok, and they get opportunities to go and study in Australia, we would welcome it, but we don't want that to be a disadvantage for students. And I think you've met the students themselves and other directors on the AustCham board, is there's an immense sense of pride amongst these students about the connection to Australia, despite the fact that they may not have been to Australia yet.
No, they certainly enjoy coming to our events, and I was looking forward and am still looking forward to running the networking session. And we will open up those opportunities for our members to participate in mentoring sessions and also internships when the world is a little freer for us to roam around again, for sure. So
there's a lot of things we plan to develop and grow there, but obviously been severely curtailed in the last 12 months. And I think, our frustrations are probably a proportion of yours, Brendan, not being able to run events and having them constantly change. But I think we're all faced with difficulties in our own contexts. But yeah, it's been a very challenging period. And hopefully looking forward, there'll be a lot more that we're doing with the Chamber.
Absolutely. Steve, just before we finish, a bit of background just into you personally. So this is what AustCham knows Stephen Healy for, the partnership between University of Newcastle and University of Thai Chamber of Commerce. But this isn't your first venture into Thailand, of course. Can you just give us a bit of background before Nurture Higher Education came along?
Look, I mean, Thailand's been long in my life. I think officially, I did the whole travel period, but I think I first came to Thailand to work, and I'm almost whispering it quietly now, in 2002, where I got the Director of Education role, and again, whispering it quietly with the British Council. So, it's been a complete turnaround there. But, from there, I spent 3 years working within the British Council in that public sector cultural relations environment. But actually then after my term finished, I actually went and set up my own company here in Thailand to continue my work with the education ministries. And so ran my own business in Thailand for 4 years, and then took an exit on that to work with a bigger global group, which took me away from Thailand. So it was a delight when I set up Nurture 3 years ago, where we really wanted to look at different models, breaking down barriers to stop unis that stop universities like the University of Newcastle doing the kind of programs we want to run. That we created this mixture of an internationalization and an academic organization, which is what Nurture is. We're not just a matchmaker, we're actually doing a lot of the academic oversight, the mentoring and development of the whole program. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I'm in London now, but as many members will know, Thailand is never far from the hearts for those who have spent considerable time there. So, it's been very challenging and almost frustrating in the last year and a bit with lockdown to be working with Thailand, but not having the opportunity to come over to Thailand. So hopefully, that will all change. But very much, I've seen the education system firsthand in a number of perspectives, as an employer, as a government official, as an entrepreneur. And really what I ultimately want is to actually give students the opportunities that I don't necessarily see them having, and giving employers the access to the talent pool that I don't necessarily see them having. So it's a big challenge, as many of us who know and have experienced the education system in Thailand firsthand, but it's something, I'm really heavily committed to.
Excellent. Well, Steve, thanks for your time, and I hope it's not too long till we see you out here again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Brendan.
Thank you. Stephen Healy, Managing Director of Nurture Higher Education Group. Coming up next, our community section. Home sweet home. What's it really like returning to Australia? Stay with us. And welcome back. In our community section in this episode, we also say a welcome back to Mandy Oldridge, who is now Principal at PeopleInsight, down on the peninsula in Melbourne, I believe, Mandy.
That's correct. Thank you.
Great. How's the weather down there?
It's very cold. I am still trying to get climatised from living in hot Bangkok coming to the peninsula. It's a little bit chilly. Not winter yet, but winter is coming.
Right. So, as you said, hot Bangkok, a long time, 25 years in Asia, and then you've returned home to live in Australia, which is what our segment is. What's it like, what we would call home sweet home? So can we start with first impressions? 25 years in Asia and suddenly you're living in Australia again.
Yeah, it's been a very positive experience. It's great to be home. We chose to come home, and there are just some wonderful things about being back in Australia. Living down at the beach is also something that's different for us. So we chose to deliberately live somewhere differently just so that we could actually experience a new environment, and also just not have same old like going back home. But it's been great, family and friends, and then making new friends as well.
Excellent. And living near the beach or the great outdoors in general, I think that's what any Australian who isn't living there, particularly in a city like Bangkok, misses most. So how does that fit in with what would be a different work-life balance living in Australia compared to Asia?
Yeah, first of all, actually about grass, it's a very interesting concept of just how many spaces there are, especially down at the beach. And my husband and I now walk down to about 30 minutes down to the local coffee shop along the beach. And just having the amount of grass that you can walk on is just so wonderful. The cockatoos, the parrots and the magpies is just sort of a wonder experience. But coming back, of course, there are also cultural differences that yes. Even though you're sort of aware of them and having worked with different expatriates, it's a very different lifestyle, I think, that I've been used to, or many expats have been used to living in Asia, where often we work very fast and hard, long hours. Whereas, as we all know, Australia has and prides itself on a much more relaxed lifestyle, work-life balance. And I just saying on Sunday, I got no emails. I don't think I've ever had no emails for the last 20 years, which makes you a bit nervous. But so there are a lot of different things to experience coming home as well.
So how do you deal with that? Are you getting frustrated that nobody's replying to you, or everyone's, or is it more, this is good, I can actually spend weekends and after work relaxing and being a bit more with myself?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, Australia at the moment is very concerned about mental health, and
as they should be, as we all should be.
Yes, and I think also in Melbourne after the lockdown, there is a very sort of microscope view at the present time about people's mental health, which means that, you know, it makes me think about myself, is that am I, or have I been in the past, a workaholic, and that, you know, maybe we can sort of chill out a little bit more. But at the same time, I think that, well, for me, I love to work and I like to sort of engage and network, and you just got to sort of do maybe things a little bit differently in the way that you run your business, and the way that I can expect people to come back to me. They might just, instead of an hour, maybe it's a day or a week. And I have followed up a few people where they've said, oh, I was going to come back to you, but they didn't come back to me sort of in the day that I was expecting. It was more of the 3 or 4 days.
What about some of the more positive things? Do you find with your expat experience, whether it's Asia or somewhere else, that you return home with a different approach to things? You might knock on doors that perhaps you wouldn't have done without that experience.
Yeah, well, for me, and I was speaking to somebody today, I work in a co-shared office so that I can meet other people. And we were talking about networking, and I think often in Australia is that people are a little bit worried about or scared about sales, sort of they don't want to be seen as selling, whereas for me, sort of over the years, I've learned to, you know, attend an AustCham function or go and do different things that maybe pushes you outside your comfort zone, and it just becomes sort of normal for many expatriates, and so therefore I have no problems speaking to people or emailing them or calling them. Today I've had 2 calls asking people advice about how to run my business, about how they run their business. And I think that we've got that experience as expatriates of asking people, because in new environments, in new countries that I've lived in, you know, you won't be successful unless you find out from others. So I'm really sort of trying to use those skills in moving forward and sort of developing new networks and friends, I suppose, as well, right. Down at the beach.
What about just conversations in general? We know specifically in Thailand, but in most of Asia, some of the conversations you have may not be able to have in an Australian office, for example. Are you facing, and they're not bad, they're just different, I guess would be the best way to explain it. Are you facing any of that?
Sorry, in which way do you mean?
Probably the topics you can talk about.
Oh, well, I mean, I think especially in HR is that there are certain things from from things that you need to be more appropriate, work politics and certain issues such as age, interviewing areas and things like that. There's a more care that we need to take in Australia. And I think that I've certainly found a change since when I left to when I've returned, is that the Australian workforce has become a lot more careful and appropriate, I think, in the way that it does business. I, at the moment, are doing some work and counselling with companies and leaders who need advice. And I have to be careful about the advice that I give from a legal perspective. But also it's interesting the types of questions that they're asking, that leaders and managers are much more sort of rounded, I think, than maybe some of the people or leaders in different companies that I've met in Asia who maybe just haven't had that experience or much that development.
Right. Let's move on to the Australian government. They're copping quite a lot of flack over various things from expats, for example, in Australia, and Australians as well. But there must be a lot of benefits or good things you see as an Australian moving back that the government provides: healthcare, education, etc.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Is that I think that Australians, we are really such a lucky country. And from even though my father's always talking about the nanny state of Victoria, we are very safe in the fact that our government will look after us. And even though there are such huge challenges for federal and state governments with COVID at the present time, is that the intention to look after those that are within the country itself is evident, and people just have been brought up, they're born with understanding that they will be cared for, which is, I think, quite interesting. When we go out into other countries, we might get shocked that that country, that company might not be protecting us as the Australian government and the Australian culture does when we're at home.
I see. It is good to know, as an Australian living abroad, that it is good to live in another country. I certainly enjoy my time here, but it's always good to have that safety net of knowing if I ever wanted to go back to Australia, that it is the lucky country, and that we will be taken care of.
Yeah, and I think one of the joys of coming home is that the culture of Australians. We are a group of people who are very happy people, very kind. Most people, I've experienced that people love to sort of ask you how you are and really want to know about your whole life when you walk into a shop to try a dress on or whatever. But at the same time, is that sort of sarcastic humour is just sort of lovely to return home to. And the other thing is that I don't have to explain in 4 different languages or 4 different ways of trying to get someone to understand me as well. So those are nice things to return home to as well.
That sounds like you're walking past my dad. He walks down the street and says hello to absolutely everyone in the street, and was quite shocked when he was doing it here and everyone was looking at him funny.
Actually, that's true. Is I do a little test as my husband and so we've just brought our 2 dogs from Bangkok. Right. So they've arrived here after an 88-day quarantine. Oh, wow. First of all in Singapore and then in Melbourne. I think normally these days from Bangkok it would take about 50 days. And so due to COVID it was a bit longer because it's come from a country that's not accepted into Australia. And our dogs and us, we sort of do these tests. The dogs are testing other dogs, sort of saying hello and things like that, because Australians have dogs that are very used to sort of one another and sort of bounding around politely. Right. And at the same time, we say, good morning. And, 100% of people say, good morning, cold today. And of course, Melbourne people love to talk about the weather. And then you can also stop and then ask people about the breeds of their dogs. Wherever I go, people want to talk about my Portuguese water dogs because they think that they're Labradoodles or Groodles or whatever that is. And so I like to explain what the difference is. So yes, always willing to have a chat, especially down at the beach.
Excellent. One final thing, anything else that Australians could look forward to returning to Australia? Supermarkets, barbecues, shopping in general. What should people look forward to getting back to?
I think going home is, first of all, some of the guidelines that I would say for any foreigner or expatriate coming home is that take it as a new country and don't think that it's just an easy settle back in. You need to almost take it as though you're going to a foreign place. And when I go to Woolworths shopping centre, I'm still overwhelmed by the sheer amount of food. My husband wants to buy $100 worth of sausages, which means that you've got this amount of sausages rather than 10, and steak. So therefore, that experience is amazing. And the fact that everybody wants to, have a barbecue all the time is, whether rain or shine, is quite incredible. But I think that also important for those that are thinking about returning is to really think about what will I do, how will I do it, and recognise that many Australians don't really care about your experiences. They're interested in where you've been, but maybe not some of the expatriate experience. So get on with life and start talking about what can be done for the future and what you're doing, rather than sort of how great you've been and experiences in other places.
That's a really good point, because I've heard the same, that you really need to, for example, Thailand, you really need to find other people who've worked in Thailand to have those conversations about the expat experience. But otherwise, it's move on to your new experience and having those conversations.
Yes, I've actually found the expats that I've known over the years who are back in Melbourne, and I've reconnected with them because and also actually people on LinkedIn who are coming home to Australia. There's also a Facebook page, I think, called Returning Expats, right, and someone told me about today. And those are the people I think that you've got like-minded ideas, and so therefore you share, what it was like or your experience. And maybe those are the people that you share your experiences with. But in regards to work, I do believe that expatriates have such a fantastic level of competency that I think Australians need as well, and that we can really add value to the workforce as well, returning home.
Excellent. Well, Mandy, great to see you again.
Nice to see you, and nice to stay in contact as well.
Absolutely, and I hope we can see you again up here in Thailand when the borders open.
Yes, I will be back, Brendan. Don't worry, I will be back, and I look forward to seeing everybody in the future.
Excellent. Thanks, Mandy.
Thank you.
Amanda Oldridge, Principal at PeopleInsight. And that's our episode for today. We hope that you enjoyed meeting our guests from different parts of the world, and we also hope that we can see them again here in Bangkok soon when the world opens up again. For now, stay safe and healthy.